Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining our panel, dealing with demographic cliff, survival strategies for higher ed. Very excited to have you all here, and thank you to my panelists for jumping into this conversation today. My name is Bryant, and I'm a partner with Tyton Partners. We're an advisory firm focused on the market of education, and we work with institutions, foundations, companies, and investors to navigate the opportunities that exist in the higher education market, as well as the K-12 and lifelong learning markets. I'm joined today by a terrifically diverse panel, and we're going to tackle this topic of the demographic cliff from a bunch of different perspectives. In most of the developed economies in the West, we've got declining birth rates in general and some specific cyclical dynamics associated with the Great Recession when no one had kids in the 2008-2009 time period. Now those kids are graduating from high school, which is hard to believe, but they are now graduating from high school and there are fewer of them. And here in the US, just as an example, we're actually at a moment in the 24-25 period where the high school age population, so 18-year-olds, is peaking at about 4.4 million. And between now, or 24, 25, and the 26, and then on to 2028 period, that 4.4 million 18-year-olds will decline to about 4 million 18-year-olds. And so we kind of take that as the starting point for this conversation. There's been a lot of discussion about the demographic cliff. It's like this looming, scary thing. But in reality, it is a significant opportunity as well. And so how you view that cliff really depends on where you sit in the higher education ecosystem. And so today, with this diverse group of panelists, we're going to explore this concept of the cliff and maybe frame it a little differently than perhaps you've heard in the popular press. So as we get started, I'd love to have my panelists who represent such a diverse different perspectives introduce themselves and answer this particular question. So from where you sit, how would you describe both the challenge and opportunity associated with the demographic cliff? And I'm going to have Dawn start.
Great, thanks, Gates. My name is Dawn Hiles. I'm with Ruffalo Noel Levitz R&L. We have about 1,900 campuses that we serve in the enrollment, traditional enrollment, graduate online space, and also through fundraising. And I think the way that I frame this actually has to do with my background. I started as I've come from a place where I was a VP for enrollment management. I've been a VP for advancement, both on university campuses, and then came to R&L about 10 years ago. But no matter the lens I look at this through, it's about revenue. There's going to be revenue that's shrinking in this population because of the number of customers, essentially, that are shrinking. But I think that it's an opportunity for people to rethink how they generate revenue on a campus. So a lot of investment goes into getting a student to a campus, but not as much investment goes into retaining that student on a campus. The average campus actually only graduates 40% of their students that start. Think about the millions of dollars that walk out the door because we haven't thought through or invested in student success and retention in the same ways we've invested in trying to get students to a campus. I also think when you think about revenue and the opportunity here, you have to start focusing on areas like the discount rate. So if you're tuition heavy, and that's how you're generating most of your revenue, your discount rate is on average right now about 50%. And so how do we think about increasing our tuition revenue rates, our net tuition revenue? So I think this gives us an opportunity to start diversifying our portfolio. I think a lot of campuses, they get their sources of revenue from one or two sources, and they're very content in that. The problem is that's like going to a financial advisor, and they tell you, hey, take all of your retirement money and put it in one stock. None of us would do that. But at universities, we do that, essentially. You want somebody who's going to diversify your risk, diversify your revenue stream so that you're stronger moving out of that. And I think that's the opportunity here, Gates, that we could start looking at and exploring other places on a university campus to generate revenue. Chuck.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Chuck Trierweiler, head of marketing and admissions for the University of Maryland Global Campus. So the cliff is an interesting one for us in a variety of ways, and we are 55% military around the globe, and what we see is the U.S. continuing to generally draw down its forces. So there's a cliff that we have to deal with. When you talk about this cliff, of course, it changes by region. So Maryland itself, which is another major source for our students, is slowly increasing, but a lot of the states around us where we also get enrollments are declining. So we're having to wrestle with that. Now there are, and I'll wait for question 2 to get to a lot of the things that we're doing about it, but a lot of it does revolve around diversification. You know, the one thing that we didn't touch on is that the demographics are going down, but we're also seeing the rate of people going to school go down. So that's kind of a double hit that we're taking in the space. Now, that's an interesting one for us because we are predominantly adult learners. So I look at that as, okay, that's a short-term issue, but because we're pretty good at educating those people, I think that long-term, and it's something I think we should all think about it, is that long-term, to get to where they want to go, I think a lot of those people eventually will need to come back to college. But they may already have they already may be married or they're already working. So how are you going to be able to deal with those people? So that's my start. I'll pass it over to Ingrid.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm Ingrid Hayes. I serve as the Senior Vice President for Enrollment Management at Spelman College. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with my institution, Spelman is a jewel in Atlanta. And we occupy 3 very unique and strained in different ways types of institutions. We are a National Liberal Arts College, we're an HBCU, and we're a women's college. So each of those 3 sectors have different vulnerabilities and different ways that the market is pressing upon us as members of higher ed. And so I think the opportunity that we see is in how we are capitalizing on the strengths of each of those different things. So people are often talking about the downside of those individuals, but I think each of them has so many positives and so many ways that we impact students that are unique. And so Spelman is one of those schools that can focus on each of those strengths and really work on it. The challenge in it, of course, is that because of the demographic that we typically attract, it is a demographic that, because of social and legal issues that are going on in our country today, are highly sought after. So we are challenged in that, as others are feeling the impact from some of the other markers in the demographic cliff, they are going after much more aggressively the types of students that we typically see. And so we have to find creative ways to make sure that we maintain or even expand our access for those students while also making sure that we're providing the type of education that makes it clear that we are a standout in each of those perspective realms.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jenny Rickard, and I'm the CEO of Common App, and we're a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1975 with the goal of streamlining the college admission process for students and reducing some of the friction there. We now have over 1,000 colleges and universities that use Common App as its platform, and 1.4 million applicants every year who use Common App to apply through the platform. So it's a great diversity of our membership. But one of the things that we struggle with is that 65% of our applicants come from above the national median income and 35% from below. And if you look at that below the national median income compared to that top, it's 55% of the applicants come from the top income quintile, and only about 15% from the bottom 2 income quintiles. So it's a pretty skewed group of applicants, despite that great diversity of the pool. Over the past 3 years, we've been able to see some increases, particularly in first-generation college students, increasing at twice the rate of what we call continuing generation students, and we've seen low-income students increase at 3 times the rate of their counterparts. So even with that growth, we still have that disparity. And when I think of the demographic cliff, having started working in college admissions in 1989, I see the demographic cliff as something that we have created. We created this cliff because we have not served the range of students in our community, and have not done that. We've been more of a system that has been based on exclusion rather than inclusion. And as a result, we find ourselves at a place where there's concern about we don't have as many people who can pay some of these really high prices for college. And how are we going to figure that out? And we've lost, public funding to higher ed, and so it's a whole thing that we've all created. And so the challenge is, how do we, recreate something else that isn't a cliff or at least a mountain for students to climb, but something that is just, a pathway that is clear and direct for a student and meets them where they are much earlier than we do now.
Yeah, so I'm Sven, Sven Schuett, the CEO of IU Group, the European odd one out in this round, and we are Europe's largest edtech company as well as the largest private university in Europe. And the way we have more or less set up ourselves to deal with this demographic cliff, which is maybe even a bit tougher than in the US overall, that in three dimensions. Firstly, we early on diversified to address working adults, like you just said, Jenny, that thereby you don't have this demographic cliff in the same sense. The second thing that we focus on is on degree apprenticeships, and thereby also leveraging kind of the opportunities towards companies, given that the demographic cliff is also a challenge for companies to recruit people, also in this the current great resignation and shortage of labor perspective, and thereby we are able to provide companies with young talent, and that is a very attractive opportunity both for students as well as for these companies. And thirdly, what we also have started a while ago is, as Gates said, that yes, in mature economies you have this demographic cliff, but in the global south it's very different. So we started to build a very affordable model to, in the end, recruit also in the global south, where there is such a huge demand for education, and it's virtually impossible for most of those countries to access education, both from a capacity as well as from a quality side of things. And those are the three things that we try to do, and see this cliff as an opportunity rather than as a challenge.
Great, thank you for those intros. Listening to those perspectives on the nature of the cliff, I actually think we should come up with a new term for it altogether. Let's just abandon the cliff language. And instead, I'm thinking about out in the hallway there where we have escalators going up and we have escalators going down. There are a bunch of factors at play here, right? So among your comments, I heard, global south, population on the rise. I heard the need for increased access for Black and other historically underrepresented populations. So up arrow on that. Up arrow on increasing access for those who come from lower income backgrounds. I heard down arrows on the military population, and down arrows obviously on the high school population, generally speaking. But I think we have a combination of factors at play here that are really leading to sort of a different kind of population dynamic to be served. Obviously, adult learners is another up arrow, but so a different dynamic, right? So let's get rid of the cliff language and let's just talk about escalators, up and down ones. You all have different exposures to that, and I love that you're serving, a wide variety of the different kinds of students that we're talking about here today. Any other observations you would make just based on the nature of the cliff before we jump into the next topic?
Ready to jump into the next topic?
Okay. Okay, so that's fine. So institutions are pursuing a variety of initiatives, right, in response to this cliff, escalators, whatever we want to call it. So retention and persistence initiatives, re-enrollment of stop-outs, et cetera. The list goes on. So based on your experience, what has worked best for you And I'd like to start with you, Chuck, for this question.
Well, I'm gonna piggyback on what Don said about diversification, because really it is a lot about that. And you know, so we're trying to diversify our student body, working closely with corporate partnerships is one of our biggest ways where we're able to leverage the skills we have dealing with adult learners. So that's been a growth opportunity for us. Interestingly, doubling down on some of these places. So interestingly, while the military population is slowly being brought down, that's actually taking some of the competitors out of the market. They don't want to deal with that anymore, and we can get better at that. So I can actually potentially increase myself by doubling down on that, as well as in Maryland. But then the other place I want to just touch on, and I won't, there's a variety of, I know we're all doing some of the same things here, is the concept, again, we're good at adult learners. We're good at transfer credit. We're good at credit for prior learning, because that's built into who we are, dealing with military and dealing with the community colleges. And so you talked about all these people that stop off at some point. So one of the ways, whether they stop out or not, is we're able to leverage that strength to try to increase our population and get them all the way to graduation, whether it's in a bachelor's or then moving up into a master's. So those are, there's a variety of other things we're working on, but I'll stop with those and pass it maybe back to you again.
Sure, thank you. So again, I think that it's true that we have to think differently. And so at Spelman, we have really had to think differently, which was a journey in bringing along the board, our alumni. We have a very strong, very vocal group of alumni who have very firm beliefs about what the Spelman experience has done for them, and they want that tradition preserved. And so, but in addition to that, we recognize that we must be competitive in a broader market. And so we spent a lot of time working with our alumni and looking at other models that might help us. And we settled on launching a new Spelman online certificate program. And so it is very distinct from the traditional undergraduate program, but it also is allowing us to extend sort of the Spelman way of thinking and looking at things to a new population of students for whom it was not accessible before. And so we try to make sure that we are providing those opportunities in a really different way. And so we, and to people who may have been in the past shut out of similar opportunities, whether with their corporation or if they are entrepreneurs. Actually, Black women are the largest group of entrepreneurs year over year for the last few years. And so we know that there is a hunger for those types of opportunities. And also on the corporate side, as more companies are making sure that they have a broader and more inclusive workforce, and particularly in the upper levels of their programming, we want to make sure that we are helping their current managers to think about that, but also, again, another pathway for many of the many adults who are similar demographically to the students that we serve. We feel like we have an opportunity to help provide additional continuing education for those students. So our Spelman program is really a way for us to do that. And additionally, we spent a lot of time working on Spelman as a way to help provide opportunities for our traditional undergraduate population. Our goal is to sort of stem that ever-increasing tuition by helping to have the Spelman enterprise take some of the pressure off of our undergraduate population. And so we are seeing some successes there, and we continue to work with our business office to make that happen. And then also, we are looking at making sure that we expand our recruitment population. Again, we have a very traditional core of who we serve. It's primarily women of the African diaspora. And so we are looking at ways to expand international recruitment, specifically on the continent of Africa and also in Caribbean nations. Most of what you hear about international admissions and recruitment is not from those areas. And so it has been an exercise in just learning more and understanding those markets more and being able to expand and figure out how to make sure that the work that we do is attractive to those students and that we can bring more of those students, which we feel not only benefits that student who comes for the education, but also those domestic students who have an opportunity to learn, again, more broadly about the African diaspora, which is really a core piece of the education system at Spelman.
I'm wondering if some of the panelists might offer perspective on the wide variety of strategies that you can undertake. There's the risk of kind of spreading yourself thin across a lot of these things. And I don't know what advice you might give, and maybe Dawn or Jenny, you guys could speak to this in particular, but advice you give to institutional leaders about how do you just manage a portfolio of things that you know, can be exasperating at times or can produce initiative fatigue.
So I think that's always a challenge. We all have good ideas. You know, right now you hear about mental health as a huge initiative, and that could spread just your staff pretty thin. So I think as people look at initiatives, they're going to have to consider ways that the initiative ties to wins that the university can see. So you're going to have to, just like we talked about diversifying the revenue streams, the number of initiatives, the size of the initiative, that should be a little bit diversified as well. So at R&L, we work through a process of strategic enrollment planning. It's a 3 to 5 year plan that actually takes campuses through this. And we always say, you know, you can start with a very inclusive list from campus, but at some point, you've got to prioritize those based on the ROI of those. And the ROI might be monetary, it might be mission-driven. There's many ways you can track ROI, but there should be a very clear and direct path from the initiative and what you want to get out of that. We could have initiatives that keep us busy all year, but the goal is, how is this producing the desired result? And so having those clearly mapped out, here's our initiative, here's the timeline, here's what we expect, and making sure everyone's on board with that helps to, I think, prioritize and eliminate the fatigue that you're mentioning, Gates.
And I would add, when you talk about fatigue, particularly in the zone of enrollment, people in enrollment are already just fatigued. Honestly, share. And some of it has been brought on by environmental factors. So we used to have, I think it was 40% of colleges were test optional, right? And now it's 96%. And you add in COVID, you add in demographic escalators, and you know what is going to happen. And I'd say the common refrain I try to share is, like, have it be data driven, right? Have it not just be the latest fad that people on your campus are saying, have you tried this? Have you tried that? But actually look at your data and the markets that you're serving and be able to explain why maybe not this or that. And try some things with students or in a localized area. I think some of the most successful initiatives that I've seen have been the ones, if you're not on an online program, that are close to home, you know, and in your own community, about how do you start bringing on, educating students, learners in K-12 about your institution and just keeping those relationships going. It's not going to happen overnight, but those are things that can be sustaining and more long-term than the latest, you know, trick that people read about, you know, in an article and then ask the enrollment person to follow up on, so, which is the lived experience of the enrollment person.
I was going to just jump in, and then I was going to ask Sven a question, because I think your initiatives were really quite interesting. But just because we haven't touched on them, you talked about, well, I mean, you were talking about the different change of the demographics. So the Hispanic population, I mean, there's a lot of immigrant populations. So those are an escalator going up. So figuring out how to better serve those people is one of your ways to get on those escalators. And so, I mean, we're designated a minority serving institution, and so it goes across all of those things. And so there's a certain skill set built into that. But depending on where you're located in the country and what school that is, that's an escalator to potentially jump on. And then one we've all talked about when we got together earlier was keeping the students we have. So that's actually a major focus for us. So you talked about the revenue hit. You know, there's a cost to bringing people in. What do you say, 40% make it or something like that? I mean, the more you can keep with you, it has a big impact on the revenue. But you mentioned the two initiatives. One was getting your costs low for overseas, and then you also talked about what was the second one was about. It was almost like felt like almost a guild to me in the old-fashioned way, but maybe it wasn't exactly.
So, also 3 comments on this. Thanks. I think in this accelerating world, in this post-GPT world, it's just that all of us need just to do more and faster. That is how this world will be, and hence, yes, one needs to prioritize. We have this nice saying, focus on more, in which you just try to do these additional initiative with nimble and easy to test with approaches without having always big projects, but just trying things in a MVP approach and then scaling it if it works, and if it doesn't work, then you just leave it being. So on the affordability side, just to mention this, I think this is in the end a part of creating more value for less investment, and looking particularly at the US setup from European perspective. I mean, US is the highest tuition level across the globe by far, and from the outside, it is a challenge to go down as always, but you can, at least that's what I deeply believe, you can create at least the same value with a lower investment, and doing this in a way that you really figure out how you can use technology in particular to provide the same outcomes that's at least what we do, and we try to also in this, just to mention it at least once on a panel in this, we leverage GPT, we have teaching bots in all our programs, and really personalizing learning in a way that you couldn't do before. And to your point, in terms of maximizing retention and learning outcomes as well, this is just such a great opportunity for all of us to really kind of double in on this technology, and that is at least what we believe it's maybe the most exciting time in education.
That's great. I think we've sort of talked about the different strategies that we can pursue in addressing some of the demographic challenges that we're facing. I heard said earlier today, I was talking to someone who I was sharing about this panel, and he said that the mantra at their particular institution is that there is no cliff, there's just a lack of creativity in how we think about new ways to serve students with new learning experiences. And I appreciated that framing. And so I think the question is, does this moment in time create an opportunity to really dramatically change the model? And Sven, obviously, you all are pushing on that considerably with the lower cost online experience that you're implementing. And I'm sure we'll hear from you more on that topic too, but I'm wondering, Jenny, if you could speak a little bit to the, how you're thinking about evolving and changing the admissions process, the admissions experience in service of opening up the access dynamics that we've talked about.
Yeah, certainly. I would say one of the key challenges in admissions, and the way it has been, is just a lack of transparency, both in admissions and in financial aid. And when you look at the Common App from 1975, and you look at a PDF of the application from 2023, they are remarkably similar. And the idea that someone is applying somewhere, doesn't know how much it's going to cost until they get admitted is really kind of an old idea. Yet we continue to do it really well. So one of the things we've been piloting with some of our members is direct admission and trying to be transparent on the front end to a student based on the self-reported information that they've provided about their GPA, that if they just press submit, on the application that they've started, they will be admitted, to this particular institution. And it's been really encouraging to see that this, we're doing a random control trial to be able to see that the students who are most underrepresented in higher ed that we are actually focusing on in this initiative are responding at a higher rate than other students and taking that opportunity to pursue the opportunity at the institution. We're still in pilot phase and gathering data to see what impact it's having, and that's why we're doing an RCT to see what kind of impact it is. But I'm encouraged about the excitement that a number of our members have about really giving students more agency in the process and doing it in a focused way for students who may be the most vulnerable in the process. So that's one thing that we're doing to try to just reinvent this process that has been really quite opaque, make it more transparent to empower the students.
Jenny, in that orientation, it's essentially saying that historically colleges pick the students, and now we're saying the students pick the college.
Yes.
And are you all thinking about how to equip students with more information in the Common App experience to enable their own choice and their own agency?
We are thinking about that. Right now, we haven't quite gotten there, but in terms of working with the students, we've been asking them about this direct admission process and what could make it better for you and all of that, is to be able to give them more information about the institutions, different metrics, retention rates, all of these things in terms of the diversity of the student body, so that they can make an informed choice. The next step is how do we get what the cost would be of attending that particular institution up front as well. So that is what we are looking at, and it's certainly a lot of work ahead on it. But the feedback we've had from the students as well as the institutions, to be able to up front say, you can come here and this is how much it's going to cost and this is how we'll help you and these are the programs that we have for you. Those are the big questions, and let's put that out there, and maybe that will work. So.
And directly to this, when one rethinks what is the normal kind of choice behavior of customers outside of education, that is how all of us, I buy something, I get something, and I know what it costs. That is kind of a very rational desire, and it's a bit strange that education still thinks that is something that we cannot do. I mean, we are very transparent with us. Okay, that is what you pay, and that is what you get, and we also tell you that is what you need to be to get admission with us. Those are the kind of the requisites. And I think this is also a way when it's one part of thinking customer-centric. If that is what people want, and that is what we need to deliver.
And when you talk to, I just can give a small anecdote, when you talk to students about the anxiety of this process, regardless of income level or a parent's educational background, it's a fear of rejection and not being worthy. Is with the system that we have created here, and whatever we can do to empower students to take more, agency and feel more empowered is, I think, going to make a big difference.
Well, and this is maybe a little more simplistic view of it, but and I have Chris back there. But you look at what's happened with the COVID and everything, and that people are so used to doing everything on their phone, and it's simple and it's transparent. So our focus is on, okay, how do I make that customer journey simple so they can watch it and they can understand where everything, so it isn't hidden from them. They know where they are, they know what they need to do to be successful. And it goes back to kind of a customer mentality and fulfilling what that customer needs. And I think that's really an important aspect for all of our schools that I think you mentioned is, you know, is it's going to start to be the student is going to start to choose as much as the school is doing the choice. So you really have to go and fulfill what their expectations are in our current market.
I think the graduate and online space has adopted this better than the traditional undergraduate, where if you're in the online space, you know speed matters. You know 86% of students who are the first school to admit them, they will enroll. And they've had to be very customer focused. Amazon knows what I want to buy. Netflix knows what I want to watch. I just filled out this RFI form. The school better do everything I just said. And there's an expectation that comes with that I think is moving into the traditional undergraduate space because of what you just said. They're used to doing things in a certain way, and higher ed has not adopted or evolved with those same expectations.
Well, I'd love to take the last 5 minutes or so and open it up for a little bit of Q&A. Yeah, so jump right in and I'll repeat the question.
Maybe this question is for Jenny, but maybe for everyone else. But I'm very curious about the standardized testing and most schools going optional with their, standardized testing requirements. I'd love to hear how you think that's changing higher education, and also, is that like gone forever? Like I wonder every day. Or, are colleges one day gonna wake up and be like, okay, we're gonna do that again? Or, is it driven by the cliff, and if we're trying to make college more accessible to students that can't afford thousands of dollars in test prep and things like that. So I think that this whole standardized testing topic is really big, and I'm really curious to hear your opinion about it.
Yeah, I can share that the information I shared about that 4% are requiring tests of 4% of our members. I can also share that prior to the pandemic, 75% of applicants would self-report a test score in the Common App, and that percentage now is 44%. And how it varies, though, before it was like 75%, and it didn't matter what your race, ethnicity, or your first-gen status. That was very close. But now it's over 50% of the submitters are higher income white or Asian students, and it's about 30% of lower income or underrepresented student first gen are submitting scores. So you see the gap there in terms of who is submitting, who's not, and potentially who's able to take a test and who doesn't. And I think I attribute the increase in diversity of Common App's applicant pool not only to us diversifying the types of colleges and universities using Common App, but also to the test optional aspect. That there were many barriers for students to actually take tests if they didn't have the school day test. And now that barrier doesn't exist. And so I can't project what's going to happen. I think schools still need some time to research what the implications and what the impact of test optional has been on student success at their institutions. But I do think it has opened the door for institutions to think differently about their process.
And I'll just add that we also have to think about there are certain types of institutions for whom the whole conversation about test optional has been much more prevalent. So Spelman required test, we're now test optional, and our faculty are reviewing whether or not to continue it. But the thing I try to help people remember is that even when we were requiring tests, and we had a, what would be considered respectable average test scores and things like that, they were still significantly lower than many of the other schools that are considered high top elite, and yet our outcomes matched many of those institutions. So we were admitting students that many other schools might not have, and proving, we were proof of concept that that test score did not define that student's capacity for success. So our students were already doing that. But because we're a different type of institution that primarily serves a different type of student than what the general conversation is typically about, we already knew that those students were outstanding. And so you just have to sort of, for your institutions, maybe shift and think about how you define what is merit-worthy, outstanding, who is capable of graduating, and that score is not always the single deciding factor in it. And so I think now other people are coming to the party and recognizing that there are other ways to determine whether or not a student has the capacity to complete a degree at their institution. And we've been doing it for decades. Both with and now without those test scores, we're seeing that our students, because we're using, that holistic process, we see that, and we know, so at a place like Spelman, we already know that sometimes the deck is stacked against some of the students who are applying to our school. So we understand it, and we're reading for that in the admissions process, and our faculty are outstanding, and they believe in those students. It's what attracts those students to Spelman, and we're able to produce the results on the back end for those students.
On that note, we have to wrap up. So that went by really quickly. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, my panelists.